If someone had told me 3 years ago that I would be standing alone in my kitchen one October evening, phone in hand, staring at the screen and knowing that my entire life was about to be torn apart by a 40-second video, I would have laughed and said they watched too much TV. But life sometimes likes to tease you with scenarios you think only exist in novels. My name is David Holston. I'm 48. I live in a quiet suburb of Colorado Springs where people say hello when they walk their dogs and know the name of the mailman. I work as a systems consultant for small and mid-sized financial firms. No glitz, no drama. Until that night. On the screen is my wife Karen, the woman I've loved for 20 years. She's smiling a smile I haven't seen in years, but not at me. It was a different Karen, fully made up, a glass of wine in her hand, a diamond bracelet on her wrist that I never bought her. Don't worry, David, she said, her voice syrupy. You'll be fine. I'm just one step ahead. Behind her was a view of a high-end hotel suite, warm yellow lights, a man smiling briefly as he walked across the screen. Someone I didn't recognize, but my stomach clenched instantly. She'd lied, not that she was visiting her sister in Oregon, but that she was somewhere with someone else. Someone she'd been sending money to for months. I didn't scream, didn't throw the phone. I just put it down on the desk and walked over to the filing cabinet in my office. Everything I needed was there. Because I'd suspected it all along. The times Karen had been late and said she had a meeting. The times her credit card had been used at a restaurant that wasn't familiar. The night she scrolled through her phone and smiled in a way I don't remember ever giving to me. Karen always thought of me as a dry, computer-bound, boring husband. And maybe she was right because I always believed in numbers. They don't lie. For more than a year I had been quietly collecting statements, opening sub-accounts, gradually transferring assets to the LLC I set up as a financial security for my clients, and now my lifeline. Karen didn't care about finances. As long as she had money for vacations and shopping, she would sign any paper I gave her. She didn't know that she had agreed to transfer the majority of her assets to my control. Just a week ago she asked me about my retirement accounts, how much money I had, how easy it was to withdraw. I just laughed and asked, "Why are you so concerned today?" And she said, "Just thinking about the future, a future I wasn't in." I knew what to do. I called the bank, report the unauthorized withdrawal, lock the account, pull out all the files. Immediately email the lawyer I'd chosen 6 months ago. A simple message: it's time. The scariest thing isn't the betrayal. It's realizing you've seen the signs all along but you don't want to believe it, because you want to believe that the person you love couldn't do that to you. I lied to myself to maintain an image, a perfect family, a beautiful wife, a stable life. And now that the mask has fallen, I don't scream. I plan. I recall a former client, Mary Collins, 72, who came to me to check her account security when she suspected her daughter of stealing money. "I don't know for sure," she said, "but I have a gut feeling." It turns out she was right. Her daughter had spent tens of thousands of her mother's dollars on booze and boyfriends. Sometimes we know, we just don't want to admit it. Karen was the same way. I had seen her lie to her best friend just to avoid a class reunion. At the time I thought it was a small, harmless thing. But now, as I traced the clues from the vacation with friends that her card showed in Miami, to the lavish gifts she claimed she had won, everything came together to form a complete scenario. I was no longer the naive David. The next morning I called Ben, a forensic auditor who had worked with me on an internal litigation case. I need to trace the finances as closely as possible. Ben didn't need to say more. "You suspect personal embezzlement," I simply said. "It's more than that." Ben and his team dug deeper. In a week they found more than 70,000 had been withdrawn from joint accounts split in small increments to avoid triggering a warning. One portion went to a man named Butcher Gregory Dalton, 45, who lives in Phoenix and works in the medical device industry. And even more surprising, he had a criminal record for financial fraud, a carbon copy of the script. I was alive. Gregory, who I believed was the man in the video, the man Karen had risked everything to chase. I didn't know if she knew, but either way, it didn't matter. This scenario was no longer about me being cheated on. It was about someone being taken advantage of. About a wife who was helping a scammer and didn't realize she was a victim too. Or worse, she knew and accepted it. A few days later, Karen started texting. At first gently, "We need to talk." Then worried, "Why is the account frozen?" Then angry. "What the hell are you doing, David?" I didn't respond. I had been told by my lawyer. All communication must go through legal representation. Because what I was doing wasn't just a divorce. It was protecting myself from a complicated and risky legal battle. One morning Karen came to the house, unannounced. I opened the door to see the face I once loved, now a stranger. The makeup was smudged, the eyes were swollen. Not the cold Karen from the video, but a woman in a panic because everything was out of control. "What did you do?" she snapped. I was just protecting my side, I replied. You're my wife. You have the right. No, Karen. The account requires 2 signatures for amounts over $10,000. And you forged my signature. That's hot fraud. She backed away speechless, because she knew I wasn't threatening. I was telling the truth. Then the most surprising thing was that she began to plead. She said Gregory wasn't who she thought he was. She was being tricked. I was silent. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. But by then I was past the stage of doubt and grief. All I had was clarity. And most clearly, I can never trust Karen again. I remember very clearly the morning Karen returned. No knock, no appointment. Just a long ring of the doorbell, then the familiar figure. But this time there were no designer dresses, no expensive perfume. Just red eyes and a shaky voice like someone just waking up from a long coma. I didn't say anything. We stood there staring at each other for what seemed like years. Then she said, "You don't understand. Greg isn't what you think." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt so repetitive, like I was watching a bad movie where the main character never learned his lesson. The truth is, I'd seen this version of Karen before in the eyes of my friend Bill's ex-wife. Bill was a retired police officer living in Flagstaff, Arizona. 2 years ago, his wife, a woman named Monica, had tricked him into signing a series of property deeds to open a bakery. Turns out the bakery was run by a guy 15 years younger who didn't know how to bake but knew how to empty the bank account. Bill lost most of it, had to sell their second home in Prescott. When I told Bill my story, he just shook his head and said, "They have the same script, David, same type of guy." I thought about that as I watched Karen struggle to explain. She said Greg wasn't who she thought he was, that he lied about his job, about his assets, that he was under investigation and she didn't know. But I knew. I had Ben's report. Greg Dalton wasn't just a con man, he was an expert at picking rich targets, especially women who were depressed in their marriages. What chilled me the most was I didn't know if Karen was a victim or an accomplice. I thought about the emails she sent, the questions about her retirement accounts, the lies she told about visiting relatives. If it was an act, she deserved an Oscar. I told her to leave, and for the first time in 20 years I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, fear of losing control. I guess she was used to being the one holding the reins with me, the one who followed behind paying for everything, keeping quiet and never asking too many questions. Her mistake was underestimating me. I continued working with my attorney Luke Harrison, a former prosecutor in Denver. We compiled a detailed dossier of all the evidence, statements, videos, text messages, forged powers of attorney, and most importantly the transfers to Gregory Dalton's account. To protect myself, I also reinstalled my entire financial security system from banking to email to investment accounts. The strange thing is that when you start to take back control of your life, you feel not anger, but relief. I started to feel myself again. Every morning when I woke up, I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to read those I'm home late texts and pretend I didn't know where she was. I didn't smell strange perfume on my jacket or hear strange laughter on the phone. And then the unexpected happened. I got a call from a woman named Natalie York. She was the ex-wife of one of Gregory's previous victims. Natalie said she saw Greg's name in my court records and wanted to share information. Our conversation lasted more than an hour. She told me that Greg used to work for the company where she was an accountant. They met when she was getting divorced. At first he was sweet, helpful, caring. Then little by little Greg convinced her to consolidate assets, optimize investments, and even sign her name on the money transfer papers. By the time she realized it, she had lost more than $90,000. She didn't press charges, she was ashamed. "I'm a smart person, David," she said, "and I let it happen." That statement hit me harder than I'd like to admit. Luke and I decided to reach out to another victim, Lisa, in Portland. Same situation, same script. I began to feel like I was no longer a betrayed husband, but part of a rigged system. A string of women who had been robbed of what was most precious to them, their trust, their assets, and sometimes their reputations. We devised a plan. Use all the evidence to get a court to freeze Gregory's assets, file a criminal case against him, and use that leverage to force Karen to agree to a fair division of assets. My goal wasn't revenge, it was to prevent this from happening to someone else. A few weeks later I got a letter from the bank. They confirmed that forging a withdrawal slip was a serious prosecutable offence. At the same time, the district attorney's office began a preliminary investigation into Gregory. And best of all, I got an email from the Human Resources Department of the medical device company Greg worked for. They were launching an internal investigation after receiving disturbing information from the outside, which I provided anonymously. I wasn't satisfied. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I wanted justice to work. I used to believe in the law. Now I was putting that faith back in, by action. At this point, Karen began to de-escalate, from blaming to pleading. She wrote a handwritten letter, something she hadn't done in years, telling me she had been manipulated, made to believe in false promises that she was sorry. I didn't respond. I kept everything, sent it to my lawyer. Then one Tuesday morning I got a text message, "You're a good man, I'm not worth it, I'll work with you to work this out." It didn't make me happy, but at least it was the first sign of the end. I had entered a battle that seemed to be about marriage but was really about trust. I thought losing a woman was the worst thing, but I was wrong. Worse than all living with someone you don't recognise. Where every hug is a lie, every look is a trick. If you're hearing this story and it sounds familiar, if you've ever seen your spouse change, seen little signs but didn't dare believe them, remember this. Your gut feeling is often right. Intuition doesn't need proof. It just requires you to have the courage to act. Tell your story in the comments. Someone might need to hear it to know they're not alone. And if you know someone who's in a relationship that makes them doubt, worry, or feel like they're disappearing, send them this video. It might be just what they need to wake up. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. And if you've ever walked away from a situation like mine, I want to hear from you. When I walked into the courtroom that day, I didn't bring fear. I brought preparation. I had spent nearly 6 months gathering every scrap of evidence, every bank statement, every text message Karen had sent, both the sweet words to Gregory and the sweet words to me to cover up the betrayal. Everything I needed I had. I was no longer the man who sat behind a computer screen reading reports. I was the man who had been betrayed but not broken. I was living proof that you can lose everything and then build it all back up better. Gregory walked in first. He didn't dare look at me. He sat on my left next to the lawyer who I was sure was paid by someone else, Karen or some other woman who hadn't yet come to her senses. Karen arrived later, lightly made up, wearing the blazer I had bought her for our 15th anniversary. A gift that, looking back, I wish I had spent on Costco stock. She avoided my gaze, which said more than 1,000 words. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a sharp gaze, read the file as if she were solving a math problem, not missing a single detail. When she asked Mr. Holston, "Do you have any evidence to support the charge of unlawful transfer of assets?" I nodded and handed my lawyer the 5-inch thick file. Each page was a case of Karen or Gregory underestimating me, a slap in the face of elaborate lies laced with gentle smiles and fake hugs. The judge glanced at a few pages, then pointed at Gregory. "Mr. Dalton, I see your name here more than I see your wife's." Gregory swallowed. Karen began to say, "Your Honor, I don't know," but the judge raised her hand. "We're not going to talk about what you don't know. We're going to talk about what you signed." I could almost see Karen break down inside. She was no longer the woman who had walked down the aisle with me, held my hand and said, "For better or for worse, I'll always be there for you." She was now a supporting character in her own story who had played the wrong card and was now paying the price. After the presentation was over, my attorney asked permission to play a video clip, the one Karen had sent me that night with the message, "You'll be fine." The courtroom fell silent, as Karen smiled brightly on the screen with her brand new bracelet, and Gregory poured wine in the background. I felt only regret that I had ever thought it was love. The judge turned off the video, paused for a few seconds, then spoke slowly. "The act of transferring property without consent along with the signs of document forgery has crossed the line of civil law. I will refer this matter to the prosecutor's office for consideration of criminal prosecution." I wasn't gloating. I just felt fair. I remembered a story from many years ago when I worked at a financial firm in Tulsa. A client, a man in his 70s named George, called me to check his account because he thought something was wrong. His wife had died and he lived alone. I helped him review it and discovered that there had been many small withdrawals, a few $100s at a time at fixed times. It turned out that it was his daycare provider who had been quietly withdrawing money from an ATM using a card he thought he had lost. When we called the police, he wasn't angry. He just shook his head. "I lost my wife now, my trust." But then he said something I'll never forget. "It's better to know late than never to know." When I left the courtroom that day, I didn't take victory with me. I took enlightenment. Karen would have to give up some of her assets. Gregory would be investigated. But what I took back was far more important: the right to live authentically. No more pretending, no more doubting, no more waking up and wondering, what lies will she tell me today? Over the next few weeks, I moved out of my old house. I took a small apartment near the river where I could take my morning walks and drink coffee without hearing the ping of a text message from the person who used to call me my partner. I started working again more deeper. I helped a friend start a small cybersecurity business. I learned to cook. I read books at night. I did what I had forgotten live. A friend told me, "David, you were lucky. You got out early." I nodded. But that didn't come from luck. It came from listening to your intuition, from not denying the truth even when it hurt. I know there are hundreds, thousands of people out there who are in the same situation I was in, knowing something is wrong but too afraid to face it. If you're one of them, I'm not telling you to get a divorce. I'm telling you to listen to yourself. If what I said today resonated with you, leave your story in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs a push. And if you want to continue to be accompanied by real stories, lessons learned from our own mistakes, don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and your 338, 5,000, freedom is just a decision to look the truth in the face. I used to think that the end of a marriage would leave a void like an empty room after someone leaves. But it doesn't. It doesn't leave a void. It leaves a maze. A place where you have to go step by step through every corner of your mind to find yourself again. And the scariest thing is not what's lost, but realizing how long you've been living wrongly without knowing it. After the court hearing that day, I didn't go out to celebrate. I went home, opened the cupboard, and took out the bottle of bourbon I'd saved since my 45th birthday. The one Karen said was too expensive, not necessary. I sat alone, not sad, not happy. Just a man savouring the truth little by little. The truth is, I didn't know the woman I'd lived with for nearly 2 decades. I thought I knew her. I knew the food she liked, the movies she watched, the way she drank her coffee with exactly 2 sugars and half a scoop of cream. But I didn't know that she could look me in the eye and lie without blinking. I didn't know that the woman who held my hand in the rain in Seattle could now stand in a courtroom and not utter a word when she was accused of fraud. That's what kept me up at night for the next few days. Not because I missed her, but because I wondered, how could I not see? The answer came from an unexpected place. My Uncle Henry. He called after hearing from relatives. Henry was in his 70s, living in Montana, a former veterinarian and the rare man I've ever met who never doubted himself. David, he said, you don't see because you're stupid. You don't see because you choose love. And love is blind. Do you know how many women get fooled by love just like men? Everyone thinks they're different until it happens to them. That made me laugh through my tears. Henry was not a good comforter, but he was right. I used to think this only happened to gullible people, to people who were too trusting. I used to despise people who were fooled, but then when it happened to me I understood. Sometimes the smartest people are not the ones who know everything, but the ones who are brave enough to face it when it comes. Karen sent me another handwritten letter this time. No apology, no blame. Just about the nights she stayed up all night about Gregory cutting off contact, leaving her with credit card debt and an investigative record. I didn't reply. I kept the letter not to remind myself of my anger, but to remind myself everyone has their reasons, but not all reasons are forgivable. Gregory was different. He remained silent, and his lawyer sent a series of documents demanding stop tarnishing his client's image. My lawyer responded by sending me wire transfer records, statements and statements from 3 other women who had been his victims. Eventually, Gregory's own company opened an internal investigation. When one of his ex-wives filed a complaint with the board, he was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Part of me felt satisfied, but a larger part of me felt sorry for the people who would continue to be hurt if no one spoke up. One afternoon I sat in a small cafe near a park and began chatting with an older man named Tom. We talked about the weather and then gradually we got to talking about our marriage. As I told him my story, he looked at me for a long time and said, "You have no idea what you've done. You didn't just save yourself. You saved others." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. When one person comes forward and tells the truth, others feel they're not alone. And in a world where trust is so often violated, courage is the only thing that can be spread. I started getting emails from strangers. Some said, "Your story is my story, just with a different name." Others shared that they had doubts about their spouses but were too afraid to act. A woman named Marla wrote, "I lived in silence for 9 years. Your story made me decide to see a lawyer. I read every line, every sentence, and I realized I was doing something useful. My life wasn't just broken, it was being rebuilt in service of something bigger." I also started attending a support group, not one for divorcees, but one for survivors of emotionally abusive relationships. There I met a man named Frank, a 62-year-old former history teacher in Ohio. He told me that his wife had embezzled most of their assets to invest in a startup project with a young lover. "I used to think I was smart," Frank said, "but being smart didn't save me from trusting the wrong person." His story made me realize one thing more deeply: no one is immune. Trust is an asset that, if given wrongly, can take away more than money. It can take away your self-belief. I thought about that a lot when I was cleaning out old photos. In one box, I found a wedding photo of Karen and me. I almost threw it away, and then stopped. I didn't keep it because I regretted it. I kept it as a reminder: nothing is guaranteed. Even the vows that once brought you to tears can later become knives in your back, if you don't learn to look at your actions instead of your words. How long did it take me to heal? I don't know. All I know is that one morning when I made coffee and turned on the radio to an old James Taylor song, the heaviness in my chest was gone. It wasn't a relief but a return, as if I had come back to myself after a long disoriented journey. Now I live in a small apartment near downtown Denver, not fancy, but where everything is mine, every chair, every picture on the wall. I have a cat named Murphy, and on the weekends I teach free computer skills classes to seniors. A student named Clara, in her 70s, a widow, once told me, David, I don't know what you've been through, but your eyes have something like mine when I lost my husband, but now I see them brighter. She didn't know she had just given me the most precious gift. If you're listening to this story and feel like you're in a maze, I want you to know this: no one is born knowing the way. But every brave step, every truth you dare to look straight at is an arrow pointing in the right direction. Don't let anyone make you believe that you're weak because of pain. On the contrary, that pain will teach you more strength than any lesson. Leave your story in the comments. I read them all. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, a friend or loved one, send them this video. Maybe just one sentence from this would be enough to start them on their sharp journey back to themselves. And if you think this is worth continuing, please subscribe. I have many more stories, not just mine, but of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when faced with the truth. This story is not over yet, because the end is not when you win. It is when you know you are strong enough to start over. And if you have ever started over, you will understand. Sometimes the best things come from the very ruins you once wanted to run away from. I thought the end of this story would be a full stop, but the further I went, the more I realized that every ending is really just a turn. And when you stand at that crossroads empty-handed, empty-hearted, the scariest thing is not how much you've lost, but how you don't know where to go next. After everything that happened, the trial, Karen's letters, the Gregory investigation, the messages from strangers, I began to ask a bigger question. How do we build our entire lives around someone we never really knew? How can someone spend their youth building a home only to wake up one day and find themselves in a house without a door? I went back to work more regularly. These days I was consulting for a small group of clients on data infrastructure and financial security. Not glamorous work to outsiders, but for me it was a way to put the pieces back together. One time while helping a female client, in her mid-60s, living alone in Albuquerque, she told me that her cousin had tricked her into signing a loan guarantee that she had never taken out. She had lost almost all her savings before she realized it. I remember her sitting on the other side of the Zoom screen, her voice low and trembling. I just wanted to help him. He is my blood. Blood, love, trust. Words that are so beautiful and creepy when used. I helped her redo her entire financial plan and taught her how to lock down her account security, something she had never thought of before. That's when I realized there are many people like me, not just victims of betrayal, but victims of their own kindness. They believe that if they love enough, are patient enough, give enough, the other person will change or be grateful. But the world doesn't work on kindness. It works on the boundaries you set, and I've never set any boundaries. One afternoon I ran into Andrea, whom I had worked with on a project for a healthcare software company. She was the only person who had asked me a few years ago, David, are you happy? I had laughed, dodging the question. There was no dodging it anymore. We sat down, drank coffee, and started talking, not about work, but about real things. Andrea was divorced too. It took me 7 years to leave a man who made me forget who I was, she said. That sentence hit me right in the heart. How did you know you had to leave? I asked her without hesitation. When I realized that with him I had to ask permission to be sad. I wasn't sure what we would become, friends, colleagues, or something more, but I knew I was starting to reconnect with the world, no longer on guard, no longer assuming that everyone who was nice to me had an ulterior motive. That was the first step in starting over, allowing myself to trust again, but this time with conditions. Karen had all but disappeared from my life. After a few legal sessions, she had accepted a more equitable settlement, partly because her lawyer knew she couldn't win, and partly because Gregory had disappeared, leaving her with debts and a damaged reputation. I don't know where she is now, and frankly, I don't care. I spent more time with old friends people I'd neglected because of work or family. It was painful to realize that while I was protecting a relationship that was full of lies, I had abandoned people who really wanted to see me happy. A close friend from college, Sam, once said to me over lunch, David, the most painful thing isn't being lied to, it's realizing you've been lied to all these years. He was right. I'm not the only one who's gone through this. You're not the only one who's gone through this. And that's why I tell this story, not to nitpick, not to gloat, but to show you survival is real, recovery is real. But it doesn't happen overnight, it happens step by step, person by person. Small daily choices like not responding to a text that you know will drag you back to where you were, like unfollowing your ex on social media, like rewriting your budget with you at the centre and no one else. A stranger texted me after hearing this story. I sat in the car for an hour thinking about turning around. But then I remembered what you said, love doesn't mean you have to suffer forever. And I turned around and drove away. Lines like this are why I keep telling it. If you see yourself in this story or a part of you that has gone through something similar, please leave a comment. I read every word. And I don't just read as a storyteller, I read as a survivor. We exist not to become bitter, but to become wise. If you know someone who is in a spiral of doubt, hurt, or in a conflict, send them this video. You never know, maybe one sentence from this video will be the only lifeline they see today. And if you find yourself, this is a journey worth following, hit the subscribe button. I still have real stories, real lessons from the mistakes that I and others have made. No one should have to learn everything by banging their heads against the wall. Sometimes hearing someone else's story is enough to avoid the first scar. I thought I would never love anyone again, but yesterday while walking under the golden trees of late autumn, I saw a strange woman walking her dog and smiled at me, and I smiled back, not because she was special, but because I was no longer afraid of other people being nice to me. That's when I knew I was back. I'm not sure when I truly forgave, not Karen, not Gregory, but myself, for trusting, for being blind, for staying too long in a relationship that my heart had long since left but my mind insisted on keeping. Forgiving yourself is the hardest part because you can't cut yourself off like you can someone else. You have to live with that memory, that choice every day. And to heal, you have to be brave enough to accept that sometimes your kindness became a tool for others to take advantage of. There are nights when I sit and read old chats, old emails, not to torture myself, but to understand. To understand why I didn't see it sooner. To understand why I closed my eyes and ignored it when the signs were there. And every time I read it, I saw an old version of myself. A man who wanted to preserve what he thought was love, but was really a habit mixed with fear. One evening I got a call from Natalie, a woman who had been a victim of Gregory and who had helped me verify many of the information in the legal documents. She said, "David, you saved me from feeling like a fool. Before I heard your story, I thought it was all my fault." I replied, "Natalie, if it's the people who are to blame, then there's no hope for the world." We talked for almost an hour, not about the lawsuit, not about Gregory, but about how we were recovering. She said she had moved back in with her parents and she had started her healthcare career again, which she had abandoned. I shared that I had signed up for a cooking class at the local community centre, something Karen had always said was a waste of time. A week later, Natalie sent me a recipe for Tennessee barbecue sandwiches that her mother used to make. I tried it that weekend. The first time was a failure burn. The second time was better. The third time I took some to my elderly neighbour Glenn, who helped me take out the trash every Wednesday. He said, "David, I don't know what happened to you, but I see you're different. Lighter, not as stiff as before." I just smiled and said nothing, but deep down I knew it was a sign of rebirth. And then there were the little things, like I started repainting the apartment, wall by wall. Each colour was a declaration I was no longer living in a house with two people, I was building a place that belonged to me. I changed my email password. I changed my car. I changed my morning routine. Instead of turning on the news, I put on a classical playlist and brewed coffee slowly. Some might call it escapism. I call it rebuilding. I also went back to running. The old shoes that Karen had once dismissed as rustic were now my most loyal companions every morning. As I ran, I thought a lot about people who were stuck. People like me who used to be afraid to leave, afraid to speak up, afraid to trust their own intuition. And I wish someone had told me one simple sentence: you don't need proof to be happy, you just need a reason. And if you're looking for a reason, the feeling of being betrayed, lost, ignored is reason enough. I remember a subscriber to this channel who sent me a note from her. She was a middle school teacher, married for 24 years and living in a cold, controlling marriage. She wrote, "I've never been beaten, but every time I want to do something for myself, I'm ridiculed or made to feel guilty, and I think I deserve it." That sentence choked me up, because that's how a toxic relationship works. Not with fists, but with the feeling that you're the problem. If you find yourself constantly apologizing for having feelings, for wanting time to yourself, for saying no, then maybe the problem isn't you. It took me almost 20 years to understand that, but I don't regret it. Because every day since I left, I've become more true to myself. I no longer play the perfect husband just to maintain an image that no one really believes. I no longer say it's fine when my heart screams that something is wrong. I've learned to listen to myself. not with my ears, but with respect for my own needs and boundaries. And I want you to do that today. Stop for a moment, ask yourself, am I living up to what I need? If the answer is I'm not sure, then you have the right to seek the right answer. You don't have to wait for everything to fall apart. You don't need a video like I got from Karen to start over. You can start from the smallest doubt, because intuition is the most powerful survival tool you have. Don't let anyone convince you that you're overreacting. Your feelings don't need validation to be valid. I think the last thing I kept from that marriage was a notebook. Just an old soft covered notebook that I used to take notes while working from home. In the early pages were to-do lists, kitchen remodeling budgets, a few notes about clients. But as time went on, the content changed. The entries became shorter, more vague. She's late again tonight. Strangely, the bill includes dinner in Kansas City. Laughed into the phone, but not at me. I didn't mean for that notebook to be a diary, but it was the only place I could be honest with myself. I wrote in it not for memorization, but because I needed a place to breathe without being judged. That notebook now sits in the nightstand drawer of my new apartment, a silent reminder that before you can be honest with others, you have to learn to be honest with yourself. One night I turned to the last page of that notebook, blank, empty, as if I had stopped writing when the truth was too obvious to write anymore. I thought I need to write a new chapter not with my hands but with my life. So I started by signing up for a volunteer financial counselling group for newly divorced people. Not because I was the best expert, but because I was the only one in the group who knew what it felt like to lose control of your finances when you trust the wrong person. My first meeting was with a man named Curtis in his 60s, small, thin, wearing thick glasses and stuttering. David, he said, I've never touched my bank account. My wife takes care of everything. Now she's with someone else and I don't even know how to pay my internet bill. There was no anger in his eyes, just confusion. I helped him set up a new bank account, showed him how to use the banking app on his phone. It took almost 2 hours. But when he caught on, he beamed like a child. And I realized, I may not be anyone's husband anymore, but I was doing something more valuable, giving back control to those who had been taken from me. My story spread. A few old friends I thought I'd lost touch with called. Some had doubts about Karen, but didn't dare say anything at the time. I don't blame them. When someone is in love building a dream, you can't walk in without being pushed out. But now they're telling the truth. An old friend, Mitch, a lawyer, said, David, you did what many men don't admit you're hurt and stand up. I laughed, Mitch. I didn't stand up. I crawled out of the rubble first. Standing up came later. Mitch invited me to speak at a seminar on post-divorce finances. I'd never stood up in front of a crowd to tell my personal story, but I said yes. The talk took place at a community centre in Fort Collins. I shared not just financially, but spiritually how to survive a betrayal, how not to freeze when what you believe in most falls apart. After that, a woman, grey hair wearing a knitted cardigan, came up to me and hugged me. Nothing, just a hug. And I understood. There are wounds that don't need to be spoken to be seen, and there are truths that need someone else to be brave enough to say them before you dare to call your name. I used to be afraid of being called weak too. Men. America teaches us to be strong, to be tough, to man up. But now I see that being strong is not falling down. Being strong is falling down properly and daring to get up from there. Karen still hasn't contacted me. I don't know where she is, what she's doing. I heard from her lawyer that she settled part of her debt with the bank and is paying it off in monthly installments. I'm neither happy nor sad. I just feel sorry, not for me, but for her. She could have chosen honesty. She could have chosen trust over exploitation. But she didn't. Everyone is responsible for their choices, and that choice sometimes is a silent judgment that lasts for years. Lately I've started writing again, not in my old notebook, but on my computer. I've written about the stories I've witnessed Curtis learning to email, Natalie going back to school, Glenn teaching me how to care for my balcony flowers. Little pieces of life one by one are coming together to form a new picture. No longer called marriage, no longer called David and Karen, but called me just me, as if for the first time in a long time I were living as myself. One morning I got an email from a viewer named Rosa. She wrote, I used to think no one understood what it was like to be left behind, but then I saw your video and I felt I wasn't alone. I burst into tears, not because of pain, but because of emotion. I have walked through the darkest alley of my life, and now the light I find is not the one I light myself. It is the light I share with others, and they reflect back to me. If you are in that dark alley, know that you do not have to run. You just have to walk, however slowly. Even if it is one step a day, if you walk in the right direction, you will get out. Trust me, not because I am expert, but because I've been where you are. And if you're still questioning your worth after being hurt, remember this: you survived. You're still listening. You're still searching for the truth. And that's the best sign that you deserve better. Leave your story. Share this video with a friend. They might need it more than you think. And if you want to continue on your healing journey, subscribe. I have more to share. Little things that can change the way you see yourself, the way you look at the past, and the way you look at the future. I used to think I was a failure after my divorce, but now I know. I'm just someone who's learning to love again, starting with myself. And if you start today, I believe you can too. Thank you. This isn't the end, but it's definitely the best chapter I've ever written. And maybe your best chapter is about to begin. Here's what I realised as things settled down: not everything you lose is bad. Sometimes the thing you think is the biggest loss is the release you need the most. I thought losing a partner of 2 decades would leave a void that could never be filled. But over time I discovered it wasn't a void, it was space. Space to breathe, space to grow, space for me to live for the first time in years. On my own terms, not around someone else. A few months after the final court hearing, with all my assets divided, debts settled, and the papers signed, I did something I never thought I'd do. I booked a solo trip to New England. Not to escape, but to recapture what I'd lost: a sense of true independence. I headed to Portland, Maine, and rented a cabin by the ocean. Every morning I make coffee, open the window, listen to the waves instead of complaining about the unwashed dishes. There I reread a book I bought but never touched, The Road Less Travelled. And the first sentence was engraved in my heart. Life is difficult. Life is difficult. It wasn't meant to be sad, but it was so real that it made me feel relieved. It confirmed something I had been afraid to say: suffering is a part of life. And if you have the courage to walk through it instead of avoiding it, you will find yourself on the other side. I met a man named Roy at a coffee shop in Ogunquit. He was in his 70s, retired from 40 years as a police officer. We started talking because we both ordered the wrong kind of cake. He told me that his wife had died 5 years ago, and he thought he wouldn't survive. I kept waiting for time to heal, but then I realised time just passes. You have to choose whether to get up or not. That statement haunts me to this day. I think about all the people like Roy, like me, like Natalie, like Curtis, and the thousands of others who are living amid the debris. Each of us has a choice to stay in the rubble or to pick up what's left and build something new, no matter how small. I returned to Denver from that trip with a clearer plan. I started hosting small sharing sessions for the support group I had been a part of. Not called counselling, just Saturday coffee meetings where people sit down and tell their stories. No one interrupts. No one gives unsolicited advice. We just listen. And from there, something magical happens. When you tell the truth, you open the door for others to tell the truth. A woman named Joanne, who had been widowed for 6 years, said she used to pretend to be busy because she was afraid of being seen as lonely. A man named Lenny admitted that he used alcohol to mask the feeling of being abandoned by his wife. I told her that I didn't dare cry because I thought it was weak. We laughed, cried, and sometimes just sat in silence. Not awkward silence, but silence that allowed the wound to breathe. I think that's what I want to share with anyone who's listening. You don't have to rush to be normal. You don't have to pretend to be okay, you just have to be honest. Be honest that you're hurting, that you're not over it, that you need time. And be honest you deserve a fresh start. Months later, as winter came, I sat in my apartment watching the snow fall through the window. I wrote the first line of a book I never thought I would write. I loved someone who didn't love me back, but I also learned to love myself enough to let go. Writing that line wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new one. One where I was no longer a victim of circumstances, but the author of my own journey. And if you're turning the first page of a new chapter, I want you to know that you're not alone. Everyone who's at the beginning is scared, but every step you take toward the light, however slow, is a declaration that you deserve a life unfettered by anyone but yourself. I know you can do it. If you've made it this far, I invite you to share your story below. It doesn't have to be perfect, just be real. You'll be surprised how many people will nod silently and say, "Me too." Please share this video with anyone who needs an invisible hand. And if you find this journey worthwhile, please subscribe. I will continue to tell the story, not just about me, but about all those who are moving forward one step at a time, no matter how heavy the past. You don't have to be strong right away. Just be brave enough not to look back. And that is the beginning, not the end. One early spring afternoon, as the branches on the balcony began to sprout new leaves, I opened an email I had been avoiding for 3 weeks. It was from an unfamiliar address, and the subject line simply read, "I owe you the truth, Karen." I thought long and hard before opening it, not because I was afraid of what she might say, but because I was worried I would feel something: anger, sadness, pity, or worse, regret. But as I clicked open the email, reading each sentence, the only emotion I felt was distance, absolute alienation, as if the words were written by someone I once knew, but no longer the Karen I had fallen in love with. She wrote that she had fallen into a dark place after the breakup, that Gregory had abandoned her almost immediately after the investigation, that she had lost her job because her name had been dragged into so many legal documents, that she had thought I would never find out because he was too trusting. That phrase, too trusting, is what stopped me the longest. Because she was right. I had trusted her unconditionally. I had thought love was untested without contracts or terms. But the truth is, trust is not a gift. It is something to be earned, maintained, and proven every day. In the email, she also said she was going to therapy, that she wanted to find the person I was before things went wrong. I didn't know if that was sincere or just a way to make amends, but I didn't respond. I didn't need an explanation anymore. I didn't live there. I wasn't the man who needed approval to move on. Instead, I kept writing. My book, which started out as a draft scattered with memories, was now in shape. I divided the chapters not chronologically but emotionally. Loss, discovery, fight back, freedom, rebuilding, forgiveness, and choosing yourself again. Each chapter is a part of my journey and that of the hundreds of people who wrote in telling their own versions. A woman named Denise in her 50s wrote that she had been married to a man who controlled her emotionally and financially. I had to hide change in a medicine box to buy milk for my daughter, she said. She now runs a non-profit that teaches women to become financially independent after divorce. I don't regret falling in love, Denise said. I just regret forgetting that I was worthy of falling in love again. Her story inspired me. I started inviting people like Denise to my sharing groups. We didn't just talk about the past, we talked about the future, how to love again more wisely, more kindly, without closing your heart. I also got an invitation from a local radio station to talk about recovering from divorce in midlife. At first I said no. I'm not an expert, just someone who has fallen and gotten back up. But then I thought, because I'm not perfect, I can tell people who are struggling. You don't have to have all the answers right away. You just need to ask the right question. What makes me feel alive? The broadcast went on longer than expected. Someone called in to share that they were divorced after 38 years of marriage and were sleeping dreamlessly for the first time. Someone said they thought they'd never be able to love again, but then found a new partner in a dance class. I left the broadcast feeling lighter than ever, as if I had been soothed by those voices. One Sunday afternoon, while walking Murphy, my cat, out onto the balcony, I received a text message from Andrea, whom I had seen again after the divorce. It contained only 4 words: I'm ready for dinner. I read it over and over again, not because I was surprised, but because I felt something different in myself, no longer eager to fill a void, no longer expecting someone to fix me. Just an invitation, and I found myself ready to respond, not out of lack, but out of enough. We met at a small Italian restaurant on Capitol Hill. We talked about everything but the past, no comparisons, no barriers, just 2 broken people rebuilding their lives with real, stronger bricks. As we parted, she said, "David, we're in no hurry." Neither am I. I looked her in the eye and said, "We're not in a hurry, but we're not running away anymore." And that's what I want you to remember. If you've made it this far, there's no right ending. There's only the right ending. And that ending is you. You have the power to redefine everything from love to forgiveness to the very concept of success and happiness. You may be standing in ruins. You may be doubting everything, even yourself. But if I can pick up where I left off, so can you. I don't say that to encourage you. I say that because I'm proof. The healing journey is not a straight line. It is a maze. But every maze has a way out. If you are patient and if you believe, you deserve to find the light at the end of the tunnel. And I believe you will find it. Just like I found myself, after everything, after the end, after letting go, after starting over. If you've made it this far with me, thank you. Not just for listening to my story, but for giving yourself a chance to reflect. If you recognize any part of this journey, leave a comment. Tell me your story. I promise to read it. And who knows, your story might help someone else who's taking the first step of a journey they're too afraid to take. Please share this video with your friends, especially those who are living in silence, in doubt, or in a relationship they're too afraid to call wrong. You might be the one to plant the seed that will change their lives. And if you find value in this story, please hit that subscribe button. I'll continue to share not only what I've been through, but also the lessons I've learned from brave people across America who have stepped out of the shadows and lived their truths. We don't need to live perfect lives, we just have to live a life that is true to ourselves. And if you start today, no matter how slow it is, you are on the right track. Because the journey to recovery is not measured by speed, it is measured by whether you turn away from the truth. I am David. I have been lied to. I have been silent, but I'm not that person anymore, and you do not have to be that person forever. Thank you for walking this path with me, but really this is just the beginning of a new chapter of life. Not just mine, but maybe yours.